All right. So I haven't done a presentation in a while, so bear with me. This is going to be, definitely not pro level. My name's Alfred Nutile. Basically, I want to talk about Vue at the 201 level. I say that because, I'm not doing some things I would consider just the basics. Who here has used Vue before? Oh, good. Okay, so we got a couple, but not too many, so this might be kind of interesting. Now, I'm going to go into Vue, Vuex, and then Vue Bootstrap, so we can cover those things. And questions, I'll ask for questions as we go. Just raise your hand, and I'll answer them hopefully, or someone will in the room. Let's go into it. So, I don't do mainly front end. I do like everything. So, but I have to do Vue. I have to do front end, and I used to push SPA, single page applications, but I moved towards components, and I'll talk about SPAs in a moment. Components are what I'm going to focus on here. Everybody know what a component is? Anyone doesn't, raise your hand. Okay, so a component is basically, I think the web is moving in this direction where we build little, if you imagine div tags, we're going to build our logic into this div tag, and it's portable, so I can take one component from one browser to another, and it should work. Also, like, it will be portable in the sense of, like, one component in Vue could spit out content that's compatible with other languages or other frameworks. So components, to me, even though you can use those in single-page applications, I'm focusing in this talk on components. So components, when I was doing single-page applications, I had to build a router and a controller, and so therefore I had my backend, which was really fast, Laravel. And it was part of the same application because I didn't have a separate backend and front end. They were using the same authentication state and everything. So I'm like, why am I doing this? Why am I building routes and controllers in Laravel? Then you just do it all over again. So when you have a good framework that's fast, you can have it render the HTML and render your components. And your components then can do everything they need to do, but without that extra layer of coding and complication. Again, I could take components into HTML. I can pass state between them, so it's really nice. To preload the page with information, or to just do authentication. So authentication is a difficult thing to do well, and so when you can just share that state, it's really nice. And another thing I mentioned here is progressive web apps. So components versus SPAs versus progressive web apps. This might bring me all the way back to thinking, what the heck, why wouldn't I just do an SPA? But this gets different. Anyone know what a progressive web app is? It's basically, in theory, the future of our technology. I mean, this is gonna, if we start building PWAs, we are basically building stuff that can run on anything, mobile, PC, we have all the bells and whistles we imagine from a really contained application. It's pretty amazing stuff. And my point is, with all this said, I might go to PWAs, which are kind of like SPAs, but they're their own world. So what am I going to do here is I'm going to look at code. I got to drag that over. And I'm going to take a page. So typically we get a project that has things that needs to happen. So we have our page. This person, this client wants a dashboard. They want to click these buttons to change the chart, and they want some percentages to show here that's magic. So one of the tricks is, how do you break this up? How do you share state between these components? Now, when I say state, everybody know what I mean there? Like, how do we share, like, the charts and the data from one component to the other? Like, one thing, I had a developer friend of mine, he was trying to build this so that they could click in different places, because there was actually more buttons than this, and he was doing all these different calls everywhere. I'm like, no. We're going to focus on a wrapper component that takes all of this and helps to bring everything together, so the state is very easy to manage, and that we'll see how this stuff works. All right, so again, I'm not going to go into much of the overall like coding side. I'm going to show some code, but I'm not going to go into like how to install. But one thing I want to kind of advertise here, and I think it's worth it, and let me just make sure my thing's on up here. What do you use to do Vue? Well, Vue command line, there's so many ways to do Vue. Drupal might have its own Vue. Who does Drupal here? I don't. I'm not raising my hand. Okay, and what other frameworks do we have here? Rails, Laravel, anything? What?
I like Laravel.
Okay, cool. So Laravel Mix is a friendly way, if you're like me, and I'm like, I need to build this component. I don't want to learn how to use NPM, Webpack, or anything, but I want all the benefits of these awesome technologies. Laravel Mix just installs, and it's compatible with other frameworks. It's not just about Laravel. But what you get is Jeffrey Way, who has great videos on LaraChat. he can show you how to use this framework, and he has great documentation, and just get coding and not worry about all the complexities that come with Webpack and NPM, Yarn, whatever. So I highly suggest digging into that. That's what I'm using. And basically, once I start a project, I do npm install and I run watch. So when I run watch, then anything going on inside of, whenever I change things, it's going to do changes for me. So, and I'm just going to start running it now. Can people see that, or should I go with a dark theme? Is that actually seeable? That's
Not very seeable.
It would be better if we can knock off the lights in the front.
Oh, good idea. All right. Show you how long it's been since I've been at school.
Doesn't help that much.
No? Yeah, it was a good idea.
Thanks from the projector.
Oh, okay, I guess it's the projector light, so, yeah.
Oops, it's hard to do this way. I'm going to turn it down a bit and turn up the font, see what happens. All right. Helps a little bit, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so I ran watch right here. I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm going to open up another terminal. And so with that said, you know, I can get to work. I can start working. So let's see what the next slide gets us into. This is really hard to do, sorry. I don't work this slow normally, I promise. All right. So, let's see. All right. So we're going to start with the wrapper. The wrapper component is going to be where I focus on what I want the overall page to do when it loads. I want to put my Axios request calls. Axios is like what we did with jQuery with Ajax calls. So we're going to use Axios for our calls. And the wrapper is going to be where I start to put all my other components. And so what that means is a lot of things. Hold on. So I'm going to change now to a different branch. So the initial install, not much is going on. So I'm going to check out. All right. So now what that means is I built inside of a folder a component, and it's called dashboard wrapper. And so that component's going to show my template area. So I like how you can do templates in other ways with Vue, but I like to keep my template in my Vue file. And in here, I'm going to stick all the HTML and other components inside these section tags. These can be anything relative to HTML, but I use section just because it just looks cleaner, whatever. And in here, I can do my logic for the component, which could be getting data and other things that we tend to do when a page loads. I could centralize listeners and other things I'll show in a moment. So that will be how I approach this. Now, to get anything to work in JavaScript or in these situations, you have to tell it exists. So when you use Vue Mix or anything, you're going to have a bootstrap file, and that bootstrap file will start pulling in a lot of your Lodash if you want it. It will start setting up jQuery if you need it. It will set up Axios, which we're going to use to make calls. So this file starts to bring in all these libraries we need. And this file, they just put in there to keep it nice and clean so you can focus on your components. And so what I'm going to do here is load a component. So basically the thing here that we're seeing is that through the magic of Webpack and things, this is going to be bundled up so that it's just a regular file in our public folder that loads our JavaScript. But as I'm coding, I'm going to work at this level and say, I want to load a Vue component called dashboard wrapper. I'm going to call it this. And it's right here in this folder. And now I'm ready to use this component just like that in the web view. Does that make sense to everybody? So now, we have a component. It's not doing much, it's just saying wrapper, okay? And if anyone doesn't have this installed yet, there's a Vue, yeah, sorry that screen's so horrible, but there's a Vue extension for Chrome where you can start to click around, just like you do with elements on a web page, and see your component. You can see the state in your component. That's a really bummer we can't see it because there's a lot of good stuff here. It would show you, you can see the wrapper here. I could click on that and it would start showing the state here. So then I would see all my state in here, and then we have Vuex and events here, so you can really dig in. It's a wonderful component made by, extension made by, I think, the Vue.js team. But we can really get a sense of what's going on this page. So the next thing I'm going to do, any questions so far? You know, pacing is always hard at these things, so if anyone has any questions or want me to slow down, just let me know. And I talked about that component, that extension here a little bit. And again, just like when you're doing HTML and you're digging into CSS on Chrome with the elements thing, this is just like that, and it's really helpful to figure out what you're working on. Now, I mentioned Axios. So, Axios is it's a really nice library. Axios is how we're going to make calls. So, when people land on this page, I want to get data for them. So, I'm going to make a method called getData, and when this page lands, I'm going to have this get called, and so say Axios getData from the back end, pass in some argument, and load the data into my state. So now I have state in this component, and I'll show that right now. Okay. So if you look here, this component now has Axios making calls. And, oh, I'm a little bit ahead on that one, but it will put the state here, and then I would have state. But just to back up for a moment, because I think I reorganized my slides. Right, that's what I did. So, okay, so here's my Axios to get the data from the back end. And then I'm going to create those buttons we saw. So a moment ago, and I did this last minute, changing this order, and now I'm going to pay for it. Sorry. But a moment ago, we saw this wrapper area where they want buttons. And I want them to be able to press these buttons. I'll come back to Axios in a moment. I jumped. I want them to be able to press these buttons and make something happen. So how do I do that? Well, I'm going to make another component called range component. Okay? And if we go back to that code I was looking at, if you look, I call it dashboard buttons because I hate to be consistent with my naming. And as you see, this dashboard, this is what's really neat. This is a really key lesson. This component lives inside my wrapper component. And if you look in that original file that I called my wrapper component, I'm not loading this button thing here because if I load every single component in here, then what happens? I'm loading every component on every page that doesn't need it. So I put my one wrapper in here, and then I take a moment to register the other components with the wrapper component. So I say, okay, wrapper component, when you load, then go load this other thing for me. Go register it, and then use it. In this case, I put it up there. Now, what happens here is when this component loads, so when Vue.js has these really simple states, created, mounted, and when I say when this component is created, I want to get that data, and therefore I want to tell Axios to give me some data. It goes to the back and gets simple JSON right when it's loaded. And then this guy, so this component has a property here, and it allows me to pass in data to the component. So this means when I get range down here, I'm going to update it here. So it's really nice how you get the simple binding. The other thing too that's here, and I'm going to talk about events and Vuex. I'm saying when you trigger a change range event, I want you to run a method in my component. So down here you see I have that method range chosen. This method will get triggered when that other component calls to it. So let's go look at that other component. Very simple component, right? I'm going to talk about how these buttons work in a moment because that's back to Bootstrap. One note here is that don't make don't make work hard for yourself. Vue Bootstrap, there's Material Bootstrap, there's Material Vue. There's all these ready to go components you can use to do buttons, to do forms, to do so many things. Don't write things on your own. Do as much as you can with these features, not only because it saves you work, but as developers, it's like, hey, go pick up this project for me. It's like, oh, you did so much original stuff and you didn't document any of it. It's not easy. So this is an example of something that could easily be done in HTML, but trying to be consistent, and I'm using their buttons. And these buttons say when you press, show it press if the range is monthly, and when they click it, change the range to monthly, and it's really that simple. And so when someone clicks on these buttons, it's going to change range and emit the event. That's the event we were listening for in that other component. Does that make sense to everybody? How that component can listen to this component? And that's how you can pass an event from the child to the parent. But I'm going to talk about why not to do that by the time we're done. But that's a nice simple way to say this child's in this component, and when this child's doing something, someone clicks it or drags something or whatever, I want the parent to then react to it and say, oh, they must want something, I'm going to get more data for them. And in this case, it's going to get data but alter the range. And all this code is online, by the way. I'll give you links after. But knowing that this isn't that great of a view, if I reload this, we have buttons, we have our network route, and we see that queries are being made as you click the button. We see state being changed and things like that. So it's pretty simple. It's simple stuff, but it's very common. I mean, it doesn't have to be complex. So now we can kind of see when I click the wrapper, we see it has state. And when you go over here, you can see all the events being processed. But this is kind of cool because you see the state. And in this wrapper, you can see buttons, and buttons have state as well. Does that make sense? So properties is how you can pass data from component to component, by the way. That's what you saw in that code where I show the button. So the wrapper passes in a property, range, and in the button, it registers a prop called range. Does that make sense to everybody there? I don't know, has anyone done any Angular? Angular 2? I found this way easier than Angular 2. Like, I did some stuff in Angular 2 and all the type, what do they call it again? I forget, type, it's very text, I don't know. But anyways, the stuff they're doing right now is very formal, and it takes a lot to learn. I found this stuff so clear and easy to learn. I think both are great. I just felt like this was a lot nicer to learn. So, let's go back to the screens. So by the time we're done, we're going to see a full working app, whatever, not an app. Okay, so like I was saying, this is Bootstrap plus Vue. It's a nice library, has a lot of things you want, form components, cards, carousels, everything you can imagine ready to go for Vue 2. It's been great. It's been a wonderful library to use. There's a lot of them out there. This is the one I found had the most extensive library features and documentation. And I wish I did more material. I really like Google's material, but I just haven't had time to move over to it. But I really like it better, actually, than Bootstrap. And again, do not make your own. Unless you're single, no kids, not dating. And again, I talked about importing the component just to cover where we looked at already. And so done. Now let's do this next component. This next component is a chart. This component is going to react when people click this. And we start to see, well, how is that going to happen? Well, I think everybody's seen now. This gets clicked, it sends out an event, this listens to the event, it gets more data, and then it fills the properties. So let's go look at that. I'm going to change to another branch. I didn't like that. Oops. All right, it's there, but it's not seeing it. Hold on. Huh, that's weird. Oh, because of that. Okay, not weird. Sorry. Git never fails. I should have known it was me. All right. So now we're introducing a chart. And so again, the wrapper is going to take a moment to use the chart to pass state into the chart. And it's going to register the chart just like we saw a moment ago, right here. And it's going to register the component. I don't need to name the component. It will default to the dash case from camel case. So it took dashboard and lowercased it and then put a dash in for the C and the D. And then I'm going to pass state into that chart. And the state, again, is when Axios loads, or when people click that button, it's going to get the state and set charts for my data. And it's really that freaking simple. I love how nice and clean Vue is. I like using templates in here because all my stuff's in one place. This template actually wraps Vue chart. You could have just stuck Vue chart in the wrapper, but just for example's sake, I pulled it out, and for other reasons too. And then it just says, hey, Vue chart, I'm going to pass you in some data coming from that JSON. And then it has a property here. Properties are just ways to pass in data to the component. So now, we get what the person was looking for, the business owner who wanted this, and they click on things and things just change, getting new data from the back end every click, right? So really simple stuff. Of course, work is never this simple, we know that. But you'll see different states changing, like that title changes and whatnot, all inside that wrapper. So, any questions so far? That's all making sense? Does it, anyone want anything cleared up, just let me know. Finally, we have this, actually not finally, we have this in the wrapper finally, but then I'm going to bring things outside of the wrapper to figure out, like, how do we share state between wrapper, this component, and everything else that they want state change. Like, you're going to see the nav in a moment, which would never be part of this component because the nav is always there. How are we going to share state there? So I'm going to go over this one really quickly to show how we did it here. And then I'll jump into the Vuex, which to me is one of the more intimidating ones, but it's really worth it. All right, so I want to say, there it is, okay. Okay, so finally I have the stats component. And so that stats component, like we see in the mock-up, will be where we just show these little random data points I have of foo and bar. And they just change as you click. So I could click this and it will change to 4070 and whatnot. Again, nothing new. I've just covered that in a few places, but just so we can see how it can move, it can be shared. And this guy doesn't trigger state, it just takes the stats property that the wrapper's feeding it. So that shows how the wrapper can do all this. But then we get into something very common where we have a nav bar. And so this is outside the wrapper, and I want to share state between these two. And this is where people might start to create centralized objects that share events. And I just didn't really like that pattern. And the guy who made Vue and the team, they made Vuex. And so I'm going to show how we can use Vuex to share the state between all these components, and more importantly, between the nav and this. Right now, this component, this wrapper is fine. The events aren't too complex. I can follow it just fine. I don't need Vue. But once I get to these two things, I want to use Vue to do that. And so Vue is a state management pattern. State is just how do we save this data coming in? How do we save the state of the interactions and whatnot? It's just JSON. It's objects, arrays, whatever. Has anyone used Vuex yet? All right, so it does have some things to get used to. The docs are good. There's great videos on Laracast. So just dig in, don't get frustrated, and keep going at it. But I'm going to show some examples of it now. And like I said before, it even comes built into this Chrome extension. So once we pull in Vue, we're going to be able to see the Vuex state of all our data on this application. Let's dig into that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check out. let's see. So I'm going to dig, let me check out the nav repository. Nav, okay. Okay, so what's going to happen here is everybody maybe already knows this, but I loaded Vue in my package.json. I say, hey, I want to pull in Vuex. So I pull in Vuex, and then in my application, I say, okay, I'm going to start using Vue. So I'm going to import Vue and use it. And I'm going to create just a regular, I'm going to say store, a constant, give me a new Vue store, and I'm going to create this object. It's going to have state, it's going to have getters, it's going to have ways to mutate the data, and I'll go over a couple of those in a moment. And then I'm just going to pass that into my Vue app. So right now, my Vue app has this store to save data. And so we have access to that now in our components. So if I was going to go to the nav component, which I just made, it's going to do all its nav stuff. But what's happening, though, is it's going to allow me to do mutations when people click. So if we go back, just to go back to the website for a moment, we have a nav, and when I click monthly, everything's changing in yearly. So it's a really nice way to share all the state between these components. And it could even be more, like the user's logged in as who, and what's their name. And so what happens here is that every time I press the nav, it's going to run range picker. Now, let's dig into Vuex for a moment. I think we have, I definitely have the time. Good. With Vuex, it's you're just importing from Vuex a couple of helpers it has, mutations and state. And then in my Vue component, I'm going to say, you know what? When in my computed area, so I haven't shown you this yet. Computed in Vue is just it's another state inside the component that typically has a change state to it. Like a good example is like, I want first name, last name. Well, my computed first name, last name would actually be a combination of two fields that exist in the state. So it's a way to do dynamic stuff preemptively with your data. And so I'm going to use this map state to import range. And well, where is range? Well, if we go back to the Vue component or the Vue object we made a state called range, and range is daily. So earlier on we were doing range when you clicked a button. Now I moved range into there, and when someone clicks a button, they're going to impact the state of range. And they're going to do that because I also imported a method called range picker. Range picker is a mutation that I made. That mutation will take the range that someone gave it and alter the state of itself. So I pass in range and I pass in state, which is up there, and then I can affect it inside my Vuex. So right away, this nav, when I click things, is not just changing its range, okay, it's changing everybody's range. Does that make sense? I mean, that's really, Vuex is hard at first, but it's really nice how I just changed state for everything in this one object. So, and it's shared and it's tracked. If we could see this, you would have all these Vuex outputs coming that would just be showing me what happened, what's going on, and I can roll back, which is great for troubleshooting. And that's one of the problems with events, and they're not a problem, I just didn't like them. Like, what triggers what? You know, who triggered it? What component triggered what? And does this happen after or before? Like, it gets more popcorny, where this is like really like centralized, and it's just, I feel like it's a nicer workflow. Now, the dashboard wrapper, I altered that in ways too. I said, hey, dashboard wrapper, don't hold on to the range state anymore. Get it from Vuex. So I've moved range up to Vuex. And I think also, or I didn't do it yet, see how I still have my Axios command here? I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But what other things is this doing? Well, it's taking charts data, and it's going to mutate that. So there's another method in this Vue area called chart data, and it's a mutation, so it allows me to change things. And the dashboard's going to use that when it gets data from the back end to set the chart data. So that's going to set data for that chart, And like I said, like, you know, that's overkill. Why does Vuex need to set this data here when it's inside this wrapper? It's just an example of how I could use it. But more importantly, Vuex came in handy when it went from a nav, an unrelated component, talking to another component. So that's a look at Vuex and how it really brought those together. Any questions so far? I'm going to move into one more part of Vuex, but if anyone has any questions. All right. So, oh, that's not my slides. Okay. It looks like I injected something here just to show you guys. I don't know if you've noticed this, and you probably didn't because the screen's so bad, but you'll notice somewhere in here I did a this range, and I did a pipe, and I did capitalize because I wanted the name to be better. So if you look at the if you look at our state in the back end, this word here is not capitalized, but I wanted it to be. And in my wrapper, I pass it to pipe capitalized. Does anyone know what that pipe capitalized represents in Vue? It's a filter. So there's a lot of built-in filters, but right away I can make these filters. And this is just a nice feature of Vue. I can say, hey, Vue filter, I want to call this filter capitalized. And whenever that data comes in, I want to do something with it, anything. In this case, I just uppercase it, right? And so right away, I can tweak my data a little bit. Oh, this was a great example. We had this project where they had dates all over the place, and it had to be formatted a certain way. And then, of course, the business changed their mind about the formatting. Well, if they made filters, they would have changed it here, and it would have fixed every date on every single component, right? So filters are a nice way, and it's kind of a side thought here as I was going, of a nice feature of Vue. It's a nice way to get your data into a state that you want it, you know, on the page. All right, back to the Vuex stuff, I think. Okay. The last part of Vuex I want to talk about is actions. So we've talked about state, getters, mutations, and now we're going to talk about actions. Actions are probably the more complex thing. They're an asynchronous process. So that Axios work I've been doing in the range, I can move into my Vuex and centralize a lot of my state logic in Vuex. It's just a nice place to centralize some of this, and I can use it in different components. And so I'm just going to return a new promise. So everything we did here is just wrapped in a promise and returns it. You know, to me, this is the extent of how far I want to get into JavaScript, but you know, then I can use that in my wrapper. And so that wrapper, I'm going to check out one more branch. Let's see. Oops, that didn't work. Well, we know Git's right, so it must be wrong. Huh. All right, just take my word for it. I don't know what happened to that. So basically, I would move my action out of the dashboard, and I would put it inside. So I would move all of this here, and I would put it into the application where it would, instead of mutations, I'd have another one called actions, and I would move all that logic down there like I showed on the screen. The thing is, this is getting big, and most people would pull this into its own file, and then you would even namespace your file so that they would talk about the particular state or model you're thinking about, users or charts or data. So you can easily pull this little chunk of data out into its own folder, into its own namespace, and pull those files in as well. And that's where eventually you would go with Vue, Vuex. I mean, this was just a small example, and then it would allow me to just do like I did here. I would inject the actions just like I did here. So I would say, you know, import map mutations, map state, and map actions, and then use those map actions down here underneath the map mutations. It would say map actions, and it would be the action I want to import. And then I would just be able to call to it. So instead of calling the get data here, I would call directly to that get data, and it would do all the work. So that's how you can move this asynchronous data out into there. And it's data that is going to take a little while to get. fractions of seconds, but I want to wait and get it before I move on. Does that make sense to everybody for Vuex? Okay. Moving on with Vue, I'm done with showing you the components. If there's any questions, just shoot. This is really fun too. If you get into Vue, you have Vue Electron. Has anyone seen this before? It's just like Slack is made in Electron. Everybody makes fun of Slack. It's a hog of whatever, but it works, and it works on Linux, Mac, and whatever. So I kind of like it. So you can do the same thing with Vue, where you run through the setup, and boom, you have a window that you're doing HTML and JavaScript in to build applications that can run on someone's desktop. I think there's a lot of fun ideas here that could happen, but I don't like building them. I think by default, Electron's, does anyone know, is it Angular or is Electron React? I forget, but I like Vue, and so it's nice that I can do Electron apps in Vue. I've tried a couple. It's just fun. It's fun that my HTML in knowledge in JavaScript and so forth can be now applied to a desktop app. It's so tempting just to focus on that stuff. I just don't get a lot of business requests for them. And that is pretty much it. Again, the code's up here, and there is actually an async branch. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing it. This page is a great example of a bunch of Vue.js stuff that you could use for libraries. Bootstrap, I talked about. Vuex, Vue.js. Pusher.com. Just on a side note, I actually should have done another slide. I had more time than I thought. This is amazing stuff. So if you go to Pusher.com, you can sign up. It's pretty cheap, if not free. But that's when you get interactive websites where you want something from the back end to come in a minute or so later after the user's already at the screen. It can update the front end. And this is a WebSocket provider, so you don't have to run your own WebSocket. And Laravel Mix has this built in where you can just start loading dynamic data like that. That's been my funnest thing with this stuff is doing that, because you can have someone run a job on the screen and you can update them with the status of the job without polling the back end. This is the Electron Vue, and this is Laracast. He did a whole series on Vue step by step. He's one of the better teachers out there online, in my opinion, Jeffrey Wade, for PHP, object-oriented programming, and for JavaScript. He's an amazing JavaScript guy. He actually even has a whole series on Vuex. It was his first time doing Vuex, so he was like, I don't know if I really want to use it. But as someone who's on a team, I think it's a lot different. If you're solo, you have more options. If you're on a team, you need to think about what makes it better for the team to force consistency, standards, and do these things that make it easier for the team to work together. But he's an amazing teacher. But yeah, that is, I think, it for me. If anyone, I was hoping for more questions, so if anyone has any, shoot, but otherwise that's all I got. I can show more code examples, whatever.
How is debugging? Like, can you step through the code? Is there a step-through debugger in that extension?
That's a really good question. I would normally do that in my IDE. With PHP, I do that a lot. I haven't done that much with JavaScript, sadly, because I haven't gotten to that level of efficiency. I'm more of still the I call it, like when I see PHP developers loading the browser to figure out how to build something, I'm like, you're like a caveman at that point. You should be debugging and PHP unit testing. But sadly, I'm not sure. But basically, you're asking, would it stop? Would it let you see everything?
Yeah.
Chrome has that in it, but I've never used it.
But yeah, like something like Angular totally hides it, and it's so hard to debug.
Yeah.
And so I was just wondering if it's any different.
Right. One thing, though, you mentioned is Vue.js does try to give you human-readable errors. That's one of their selling points. So that's nice there. The other thing, too, is I keep components so small, right? So if you think about every component we built, what I'll build is a testing route called testing. And I'll never have anything more in there than the one component I'm working on. Because components should work fine individually of the other components. So I'll build that way, because I'm still kind of in caveman mode, where some people would do unit testing, and they would just be, and I love when I see people do that. There's a lot of good presentations on how to do Vue.js or JS building at the command line or via unit test. So every time I save, it would run it. That to me is the way to go. But right now I take one component at a time, I build it, and then plug it in like Legos. Any other questions? Yeah.
A lot of these frameworks seem to kind of assume that you're building the entire app from the ground up in like React or Angular or Vue. Like if you have a web app that exists already, but it's just plain HTML and JavaScript.
Yeah, I know, huh?
Is it possible? Like,
Yeah.
how would you recommend?
No, this is a great question. So basically, what's your name?
Michael.
Michael. So it's a great question. Like, this is a good example of where you don't have to do that. Like, I could have started a Laravel app, and weeks later, I could have installed package.json in Laravel Mix. It would have created this Webpack file that can do a bunch of pre-processing for me. And now, all of a sudden, I can start pushing data into my public folder. So now, it has nothing to do with Laravel or Drupal. It's just going to push the compiled files into folders that then my HTML can say, hey, when I'm loading this, go render it, right? So it would be that easy to do what you're saying. And so any typical page, let me move this over a little. Okay, so with Laravel, it renders this page. And in this page, this is plain HTML. Well, inside of a Twig-like template engine. I'm going to load my wrapper component. So I could have stuck this into anything as long as it's compiled, which you saw Webpack could do in npm install. So when we do CI or development or builds, npm will run build production or build dev. And it will take this HTML, it will take those JavaScript and CSS files and put them in the right folder. And Laravel, just like Drupal, has a main template file that does all the loading. And this file just loads app.js, app.css. And that's it. You're right, a lot of them are like, type Vue.js command line. It's like, I don't want to because I already have this application. So no, Laravel Mix is a great way to just plug in a lot of this. When I first started, though, you could even just do what Vue.js has on their website and just pull in the script to the head of your thing and do a lot. I don't know how you would do the manual compiling, though, but I'm just saying, like, at what level could you start off simply? There are some options there, too. Good question, though. Yeah?
I was curious, have you used Nuxt at all?
No. What is it?
So it's a framework for building Vue apps. I was just curious if you had any opinions on it.
Yeah, no. Is it iOS or is it just, is it like mobile or is it just for building Vue apps?
No, it's for building universal apps. It kind of the opposite of Michael's question if you want to
Yeah. So it would be its own thing with its own, does it provide its own backend too?
No.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And so you would just host it as a regular web HTML JavaScript, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And it's basically just giving you a bunch of sugar on top of Vue, more or less, to help you build out like a full.
It's so tricky though. Like, who would use that? I guess it's the people who are building single-page applications. They don't have a framework yet, right?
Yeah. Most people are probably using some sort of, like most completely front-end applications. You're using some other data store that you're feeding in from. Same stuff, but just like little routing features and things like that.
5 minutes. I got the warning. Wait, I get 2 minutes. How many minutes I got? Really? Jeez. My clock. This thing's been running for a while. I guess I started early. But yeah, how do you spell that again?
NUXT.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, like that.
I'd be curious if anyone else has used it. I'd be curious to hear this one.
No, I started with like Ember and what was the other one at the time? But once you have to integrate it to Drupal or Laravel, those things just became impossible. If you weren't making a single-page application, that is, And again, with single-page applications, you have to manage state, you have to manage authentication. It gets tricky, and I'm not sure the reason sometimes why to use it in those cases. So, anything else? Any other questions?